The campaign against the marriage amendment began almost before it was placed on the ballot. Republicans won control of both the Minnesota House and Senate in 2010, giving them majorities in both chambers for the first time in 40 years. They would make good on a long-sought goal to put a constitutional amendment on marriage on the ballot. In 2011, at the end of their first session in charge, Republican leaders brought the marriage amendment to a floor vote, first in the Senate, then the House. Protesters flocked to the Capitol, urging a no vote. The proposed marriage amendment passed both chambers on near party line votes. Emotional crowds lined the corridors of the Capitol, chanting, "We've just begun to fight." In the immediate aftermath of the vote, Scott Dibble, an openly gay DFL state senator from Minneapolis, said opponents of the amendment would have to pull themselves together and start the campaign to defeat it.
It's too bad we lost on a very, very close vote. It's going to touch off 18 months of a very angry and divisive and negative campaign, but we're going to overcome all that anger and all that divisiveness and all of that misinformation that they're going to try to tell about us and our families with the truth and with the story of love and hope and positivity.
Gay rights groups had hoped the legislature would defeat the amendment, but they had a plan B just in case. Project 515, a group named for the 515 Minnesota laws that discriminate against gay and lesbian families, and Outfront Minnesota, an advocacy group for LGBT Minnesotans, would co-found the campaign to defeat the amendment. They named it Minnesotans United for All Families. Ann Kaner-Roth is the executive director of Project 515.
So we had begun to gather some folks, begun to do some fundraising, and announced that the launch of that organization within an hour of the passage of the bill.
The campaign's board was made up of nearly 40 leaders connected to the most crucial arteries of Minnesota life. It included Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and Greens, movers and shakers from business, labor, nonprofit, and faith groups. It also included key national partners like the Human Rights Campaign and Freedom to Marry. In September of 2011, Minnesotans United for All Families hired 30-year-old Richard Carlbaum as its campaign manager. The young Politico had run Democratic Congressman Tim Walz's re-election campaign and worked as communications director for St. Paul DFL Mayor Chris Coleman. Carlbaum's gay and hopes to marry his fiancée someday in Minnesota, the state he's always lived in. Carlbaum says he was impressed by the diverse forces the board had marshaled to beat the amendment.
And the people I saw sitting around the table was remarkable. I literally saw Representative Tim Kelly, who's part of Speaker Zeller's leadership circle, sitting next to Denise Cardinal, who I knew for the next year would do everything she could to get the Republicans thrown out of the State House. Like, that was her mission in life, is to win back the legislature for the Democrats. Yet they both were sitting there in the same room, willing to set that baggage at the door and actually come together and work arm in arm to beat this thing.
Carlbaum said his job was to take what he described as the nucleus of that board, a disparate group of people who shared one goal of defeating the amendment, and grow that statewide. He would need a massive amount of money. Proponents of the amendment talked about raising $5 million. Minnesotans United would need to match that, and then some. At his last staff meeting before the election, Carlbaum reminded his team of the mountain of cash they'd raised.
When I started in September 2011, I was asked to develop a budget to what I thought we'd need to win. And I developed an $8 million budget, a $10 million, and a $12 million budget. And the board of directors and some supporters told me that I should actually be developing a 4, 6, and 8. And that's the most we would ever raise in order to beat this amendment. But I knew that it was going to take a lot more to build the kind of massive, volunteer-driven, empowered campaign that it takes to beat this thing.
When it was all said and done, Minnesotans United for All Families would raise $12 million, more than double its opponents. The money would come from house parties and spontaneous bursts of fundraising creativity from supporters who wrapped cars in decals, bicycled around the state, held book sales, and hit up relatives. A huge share would come from dialing for dollars by Minnesotans United leaders, including Carlbaum. In a tiny room at the front of the St. Paul campaign office, Carlbaum worked the phones while an assistant handed him sheet after sheet of donor prospects, some of them being hit up again and again.
So I'm calling to ask you to dig deep and sacrifice one last time and to make a contribution of $1,000.
Out of the gate, Minnesotans United would dominate the race financially. Their opponents, Minnesota for Marriage, the main group working to pass the amendment, said they expected to be outspent. Minnesota for Marriage campaign chairman John Helmberger said this in June.
Sure, we'd like to be further along than we are, wouldn't everybody? But we've expected all along that the other side would outspend us, just as the opposition to protecting marriage has done in every other state that's dealt with this issue. We don't have to change a lot of minds because the majority of people are with us already.
The campaign finance reports revealed vastly different stories about the campaigns the two sides were building. Minnesota for Marriage testified before the Campaign Finance Board that naming donors could subject amendment supporters to harassment. Most of the group's money came from the Minnesota Catholic Conference, the Minnesota Family Council, and the National Organization for Marriage. Few individual donors were named. By contrast, Minnesotans United reported the name of each and every donor, even those beneath the reporting threshold. By the end, more than 67,000 people contributed to the campaign, 92% of them from Minnesota. And some of those names would be a who's who of Minnesota. The Polad family, Governor Dayton's sons, Marilyn Carlson Nelson, Bill George, the former CEO of Medtronic, and the CEOs from General Mills, Cargill, and Ecolab. Companies took a stand too. St. Jude Medical, Thomson Reuters in Minnesota, and General Mills came out publicly against the amendment. Marriage amendment supporters staged a boycott of General Mills in June, filmed by The Uptake.
General Mills should stay out of the marriage redefinition business and stay in the cereal business.
At the annual meeting with shareholders in September, CEO Ken Powell defended General Mills' position to shareholders.
We stated our position on this matter because we do see it as a business issue. We don't believe it's in the best interest of our state or our employees, and so as a Minnesota-based company, we took the position that we oppose it.
In the end, the boycott didn't make a dent in the company's bottom line. The campaign to defeat the amendment needed worldly goods to win, but it also wouldn't overlook the tremendous power of Minnesota's faith community. Clergy United for All Families launched in June of this year. Catholic, Jewish, Unitarian, Quaker, and every mainline Protestant faith were represented. Carl Baum says Minnesotans United harnessed energy that had been mounting in a broad spectrum of faith communities.
In the early stages of this campaign, it was that the faith community was there. They were the ones early in this campaign where we had a gathering and we were hoping to get, 100 people, and there were 550, 600 people who showed up. It was unbelievable.
Carl Baum says it was that moment, 4 days into his job, when the faith turnout blew him away, that he knew the campaign might really win. Carl Baum says many Minnesotans look at the issue of same-sex marriage through a religious lens. The campaign would embrace that rather than cede the religious ground to their opponents, who were led by evangelicals and the Catholic Church. Minnesotans United wanted to turn the religious freedom argument in its favor. Its faith communities wanted to bless the unions of same-gendered couples, and a constitutional amendment would limit their religious freedom to do that. In June, NPR News interviewed Minnesotans United's faith director, Lutheran pastor Grant Stevenson. Houses of worship would be places for Minnesotans to engage with each other on the deeply personal issue of same-sex marriage. Stevenson said the emphasis would be on listening, not lecturing.
I wish this wasn't on the ballot, but there is an opportunity here for congregations to really get to know each other better and to grow in their ability to understand where someone on the other, someone sitting next to them in church or in the synagogue is at. There's an opportunity, and we're trying to take advantage of that opportunity. It may be that we'll come through not only defeating the amendment in the fall, but with a bunch of faith communities who know each other a lot better than they did a year before.
Clergy United would grow to include 600 leaders from 100 faith communities, reaching into every corner of the state. The Catholic Church would play a towering role on the other side of the amendment debate. The state's bishops had made passage of the marriage amendment their top political objective. Catholic leadership wouldn't allow debate over the issue within the church, so dissension spilled out in the public square. In May of this year, in 2 separate events, 80 former priests and 3 retired priests spoke out against the amendment. Father Tim Power, ordained in 1966, said he was compelled to speak out by the collective silence imposed on priests by the church.
One of the things that kind of pushed me towards this is people saying to me, where is the voice of the priests that believe the way we do? You can't all believe the party line. And I'm thinking, yeah, where are they? That's us.
Lawn signs sprang up saying another Catholic voting no. It was unclear how many Catholics, the state's largest religion, would vote the way their church leaders wanted them to. Minnesotans United had a clear strategy to not only tap the faith community, but also to appeal to voters of every political stripe. The coalition knew it would need to win no votes from Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. Carl Baum had to build a team of political masterminds who could reach into their different bases for support. At its last big rally on Northrop Plaza at the University of Minnesota, 8 days before the election, that omnipartisan approach was evident.
My name's Matt Lewis. I'm the communications director of the Independence Party of Minnesota, and we are a proud member of this coalition.
Lewis told the crowd that the communications teams from the 3 competing candidates for governor in 2010 were all working together for Minnesotans United. From the Republican camp of former GOP candidate Tom Emmer came Carl Kuhl and Patrick Conley. They're political consultants with impeccable Republican credentials. This political season, though, they'd lend their smarts to Minnesotans United. Kuhl says they focused on arguments that would be persuasive to conservatives.
I think what this campaign has done an exceptional job of is reminding folks that the Constitution is used to safeguard freedoms and not limit them. That's a message that resonates with Republicans, Democrats, liberals, and conservatives.
Kuhl and Conley thought the campaign could persuade about 15% of Republicans to vote no. It would be a crucial sliver of the electorate. Patrick Conley says to do that, Republicans needed to be a visible part of the campaign.
Wheelock Whitney and his grandson Alex went up to they did a northern tour, went to Duluth, Hibbing, and Bemidji, and he's out there stumping.
He's referring to 86-year-old Wheelock Whitney, who'd run twice as a Republican candidate for statewide office and made an ad.
When my son told me that he was gay, it was a shock. It didn't take me very long to realize that he deserved the same kind of happiness. Things change. I wanted to change in my lifetime, and I don't have that many years left, so I'd like to start with defeating this amendment.
The Republicans interviewed for this story smiled about the surreal moments of teaming up with former adversaries. After all, Carl Baum's a Democrat, and Democrats would deliver the bulk of the no votes the campaign needed. But staff members of both parties seemed moved, or at least refreshed, by having the chance to work on a campaign that aimed to be truly nonpartisan. 24-year-old Jake Loesch left his job as a Republican Senate staffer to join Minnesotans United. Loesch served as deputy communications director and ran social media, an area where Minnesotans United dominated its opponents.
It is interesting to sit in these meetings weekly and look around the room and know that there's a lot of us who are sitting around this table who are voting completely opposite. We're voting the same on only one thing. And I think that politics is better because those of us who may disagree on a lot can come together even on powerful issues like this.
On election night, after the victory, Loesch said he believed Minnesotans United had built a coalition so broad it couldn't be stopped. The coalition had grown to 700 partners and 23,000 volunteers. Another campaign strategy credited with winning the race was the focus on personal conversations. On Facebook, the campaign playfully called the strategy its secret weapon. The campaign trained volunteers how to talk about the amendment with their friends and family. Jen Arnold and Allison Fraley led one of the coalition's many trainings.
30 states have passed amendments that are similar to this one. And so we've done a lot of research about what works and what doesn't. And what we discovered is that people have emotional concerns about marriage for same-sex couples. So we're learning how to react to that.
But as Jen said, we have to talk about it a little differently. In the past, our side of the fight has focused on about rights and equality and that this is discrimination. But that frame of mind does not move voters.
Minnesotans United had carefully studied the long track record of losses in other states. The woman who'd done that research for them was Phyllis Watts, a psychologist in Sacramento. Watts says voters don't see same-sex marriage as a political issue, but more about values.
And they're struggling with competing values, and one set of values is tradition, and in that we could put religion, or we can put, if this is just the way it's always been. And then another set of values, which is important and equally compelling for them, And that is to do right by others, to genuinely treat others fairly, which is a pretty deep value in most people, and quite frankly in Minnesotans, I think very, very deep.
Watts would help Minnesotans United put together an ad campaign to try to win over these conflicted voters.
And a lot of times what people need is to hear from folks that they can identify with who, have long-term marriages, solid marriages, good marriages, have kids, and who say, I'm voting no on this, and here's why.
Our parents taught us the golden rule, not judging others and treating others the way we'd like to be treated.
And those are the values we're showing our children by voting no on the marriage amendment.
We fought long and hard about it, and we know that someday allowing everyone the freedom to marry won't change our kids' values.
Because they get those values from us.
We've been married, what'll be...
The strategy of using straight people who've grown to accept same-sex marriage, journey parents in the lingo of the consultants, is not without controversy. David Fleischer directs the Leadership Lab at the LA Gay and Lesbian Center. Fleischer's a veteran of 40 ballot campaigns affecting the LGBT community across the country. He brought his team of 11 to Minnesota in August to help Minnesotans United beat the amendment. Fleischer wrote a 500-page analysis of what went wrong with California's Prop 8, which repealed gay marriage. It's a report Minnesotans United staff devoured. Fleischer says Minnesotans United and other campaigns defending same-sex marriage around the country sometimes struggle with how to present gay people in their ads.
And part of the reason for that is that when you do polls and focus groups to test potential messages, messengers, and ads, gay people don't test that well. Turns out we're unpopular. Turns out if you give people a choice between chocolate ice cream or chocolate ice cream with added gay, people choose chocolate ice cream. I just summarized millions of dollars of research done for these campaigns.
Fleischer warned Minnesotans United to prepare an adequate response to the inevitable ads the other side would bombard voters with in the final weeks of the campaign. Ads run by marriage amendment supporters in other states warned of young children being taught about gay marriage in school, stoking a visceral fear in many parents that the gay rights side was powerless to overcome. 20 days before the election, Minnesota for Marriage dropped the tough ads Minnesotans United had been waiting for.
When same-sex marriage has been imposed elsewhere, it has not been live and let live. People who believe marriage is one man and one woman have faced consequences. Small businesses fined, individuals fired, charities closed down. Churches sued. Same-sex marriage taught to young children in elementary school, and parents have no legal right to be notified or to take their children out of class that day.
Minnesotans United pounced. They'd pre-bought $1 million worth of ad time. They hoped the conversations with real people would inoculate voters from the power of the ads. They developed a rapid response team. One of Governor Dayton's communications staffers was on loan to fact-check ad claims and push them out to the media. Clergy United spoke out against the claims in the ad. Several media, including NPR News, fact-checked the claims and found them misleading. And when it came to claims about children, the Vote No Coalition helped to neutralize Minnesota for Marriage's arguments by having the Minnesota chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics in its corner. Toward the end of the campaign, Carl Baum seemed upbeat that his campaign could withstand the firepower of $3 million worth of ads the opposition had bought. Minnesotans United countered with an ad from Cottage Grove Republican lawmaker John Kriesel, whose speech against the amendment on the House floor had gone viral.
Corporal Andrew Wilford. He gave his life in Afghanistan protecting our freedoms. He was gay. I cannot look at this picture and say, Corporal, you were good enough to fight for your country and give your life, but you were not good enough to marry the person you love. I'm pleading with you to vote no.
Vikings punter Chris Kluwe jumped into the fray. His outspoken opposition to the amendment likely brought the vote no message to a new audience of sports fans and men. 4 days before the election, Minnesota for Marriage released a 1-2 punch of new ads. One had sharper imagery of broken glass and talked about broken promises that same-sex marriage wouldn't change society. The other was softer. Women talked about how they could care about gay people and still vote yes.
Everybody knows somebody who's gay.
Gay or straight, we're all entitled to love and respect.
but we can support gays and lesbians without changing marriage.
Having lost the argument decades ago that being gay was an illness, abnormal, or a lifestyle choice, marriage amendment supporters had to finesse how voters could know and care about gay people and still vote yes. They said the amendment wasn't anti-gay and it wasn't personal. Karlbaum didn't buy it.
I am sorry. What planet do you live on when you don't think that this is hurtful?
But his campaign was careful not to label their opponents or engage in name-calling. 14 months before the election, Karlbaum said in his first interview with NPR that he wanted to foster a conversation that Minnesota could be proud of. In his final meeting with his staff, 8 days before the election, it was clear he felt he had delivered on that.
We've changed lives. We've changed the environment in which gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people live in greater Minnesota because of the work our organizing team have done. We can and will beat this thing.
The campaign would change the state. It would force delicate and personal conversations, many for the first time. While anti-amendment orange signs blazed in the Twin Cities metro, the outcome was less sure in exurbs and greater Minnesota. In Hibbing in June, Wendy Griffiths wondered aloud at a meeting of the Iron Range GLBTA what would happen.
It's weird to think that these neighbors, these people I don't know, are choosing for us. It kind of freaks me out a little bit. You know, how we make the phone calls and whatever. It's a little disheartening to, like, is there going to be enough support?
As it turned out, a majority of Minnesotans had their backs. 52% cast a no vote or left their ballots blank. Minnesota became the first state to vote down a constitutional amendment limiting the rights of gays and lesbians to marry. The same night, voters in Maine, Maryland, and Washington state backed same-sex marriage. The day after the election, at a rally at the Capitol, where the campaign had begun 18 months before, DFL State Senator Scott Dibble reminded supporters of what they'd accomplished.
Guess what? Love prevailed! Woo! Yeah!
The organization Minnesotans United built over a year and a half with an army of donors and volunteers may play a role again as the state ponders whether to legalize same-sex marriage. Sasha Aslanian, Minnesota Public Radio News.